What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. So I'm still waiting on some of the hard parts that I need for the Teen Dream Camaro. I want to continue to make progress on this, and I find that I've been procrastinating. It's time for me to just get to work on this wire harness. First thing I'll do, get the harness stripped off of the 3800. Get the harness from the LM4 laid out, and then start mapping how I want to run things. So I've got the wiring that I need off of the V6. I've got my 4 connectors that go along the passenger side fender right here, and all the wires that come out of those. I've also got the 2 connectors that connect on the kick panel on the passenger side and all the wiring that goes to those. Now, a fair amount of those wires from these connectors here run to the PCM. So I de-pinned those in the hope that they have the same function, just different connector style, and I can just swap them out on the PCM from the LM4. So spread out here on the floor is the wire harness from the Envoy. It's complete, everything is here, everything I need, right? Now, obviously there are some differences, but this will be essentially the foundation of my wire harness. So the way I did this, I got online, I found the PCM connector pinout for the 2004 Envoy, which is the PCM I'm going to be using. And then I found the connector pinout for the 2002 Camaro. I was able to read where those pins came from in the Camaro connector and find that location in the Envoy connector. So when I get everything routed to where I want, all I'll need to do is remove the original wire from the Envoy connector and plug in the Camaro wire. And that's gonna allow me to retain essentially a stock appearing wire harness from the PCM out to all of the Camaro external outputs. Now the other harness I have here, this is the harness that we cut out of the 2006 Impala SS that we got the intake manifold from. I took this one because I need the fuel injector connectors. These fuel injectors are different from the truck fuel injectors. So I need the fuel injector connectors. I'll splice those into the Envoy harness in place of the factory injector connectors. And I also needed the manifold absolute pressure sensor connector, as well as the electronic throttle body connector. So I'll be able to pull the connectors out of this harness and splice them onto the wires in the Envoy harness. Now, while I'm doing all of this, I want to tuck the harness also. I want this to look a little bit nicer than stock. And essentially what a tuck means is the only wires you'll see up here are going to be the ones that are absolutely necessary. So the next thing I'm going to do is get the Impala harness unwrapped, deciphered, and disconnected. So all I'll have is wire pigtails hanging along the intake manifold. Then I'm going to get the Envoy harness unwrapped, remove what I don't need, like the downstream oxygen sensors, the park safety switch, the transmission connector, a few other odds and ends also that I'm not going to need because I'm not going to be running downstream oxygen sensors. Obviously, I'm running a manual transmission now instead of an automatic. so I can get all of that wiring out of that harness. I don't need it anymore. The really nice thing about doing this with a GM harness is the connectors really will only fit, for the most part, in the place that they're meant to go. And what I mean by that is, like, the cam position sensor, it will only plug into the cam position sensor. The crank position sensor will only plug into the crank position sensor. It kind of eliminates that worry of like, shoot, am I ever going to be able to get all these connectors back where they go? So it's physically impossible to put the wrong connector into the wrong sensor. Next step is get the stuff out of it that I don't need. No sense in sorting through more wires and more connectors and more nonsense than I need to sort through, right? So I'll get the stuff I don't need out of the harness, and that'll make it a little bit less of a mess to deal with. There's quite a few wires that run down to the park reverse switch, the transmission connector plug, the two oxygen sensors. I mean, it takes a good chunk out of the harness just getting rid of that. So that's the next thing I'm going to focus on. If you're not familiar, you can either trace the wires back to the PCM connectors and pull them out that way, or you can go to lt1swap.com, and he has a complete pinout list of pretty much every year and model PCM that uses these LS style engines. So you can look it up by the connector pin list and then depin the wires that you're not going to use also. I've got my transmission and downstream O2 sensor connections and wiring all pulled out of the harness. So I'm going to keep this stuff in case I end up needing any of it. And like I said, it's nice to have extra pinned wires. So I'm going to keep these in case I need them, but I'm going to put them aside. Pretty much everything left in this harness is either inputs or outputs. So inputs from sensors related to the engine, or outputs to parts of the engine. The next thing I'll do is actually sort out which ones are which and start to lay out my harness where I want everything to be. Okay, so next thing I need to do here is try to get my harnesses here to not be just a tangled mess that looks like essentially a pot of spaghetti. And the way I do this, and I think this works really well if you have the space and the ability to do this as well, is hang your connectors up, and that'll make it a little easier for you to kind of get everything fished out, sorted out, divided over to wherever it goes. There are a few wires that run from this connector to this connector, and you'll find your ground splices and some of your power splices connect the two connectors as well. But the majority of these wires go from the connector to something else, an injector wire or a sensor or something like that. So by getting it hung, you can more easily see what goes where, get things separated and pushed apart from each other, and get your harness a little bit more organized so you can actually tell what's what and make it look a little more tidy. And don't forget also your pink wires. The pinks are all battery positive voltage. Regardless of what they go to, that needs to be connected to battery positive voltage. So I have all these wired together from when I started on the stand. I'm just going to snip them off right here. again, to make it easier to get sorted out what goes to what and where. When I'm doing stuff like this too, if I need to cut wires, I try to keep as much length in the wire as I can. That way, if I need to connect it to something else or make a splice somewhere, hopefully I have enough wire that I only need to make one connection. I don't need to add in a longer section of wire. A good rule of thumb when you're doing wiring is you only want one connection or splice per run between the origination of that wire and the termination. So whether it's a connector, a ground, a sensor, whatever it may be. The most you want to have is one connection. Otherwise it should be solid wire from wherever it starts to wherever it ends. Also to note, the solid black wires all go to ground. There are a few grounds that are black with a white tracer. There are also black with white tracers that go to other things besides ground. So you just need to make sure you can look up what they are. There's one of my coil pack wire connectors. So as long as I have one end of that connector still at the PCM, I'll be able to look at the pinout and figure out what that needs to be connected to. So here I've got something. I believe this is the oil pressure sensor. This goes to both connectors. So I'll leave that there hanging in the middle. This goes over here. You just sort it out like that. I'm going to keep going. Alright, so I've got my harness all spread out now. I've got the blue connector only wires, the green connector only wires, and the connectors that hit both blue and green. Now, this connector here, I suspect a lot of the wires that run into this are going to be the wires where I'm plugging in the Camaro harness. These go to the external outputs like the fuel pump relay, the evap canister, the tank pressure sensor, all those things. So some of these I won't need at all. Some of them are going to get connected into the Camaro harness, like I said. And they'll be connected. I'll pull the pin from the connector up here and put the Camaro pin in. So now the next thing I need to do is label my injector wires for which one goes to which fuel injector, and then I can start mapping out my harness on the engine itself and draping these wires where I need them to be. Same on this side with the coil plugs. I'll look at the pinout, see which plug goes to which bank of cylinders, and then I'll be able to map those out as well. Get them put where they need to be too. It's good progress. It is tedious, but it's good progress. All right, everybody, that's it for this video. The electrical modifications that I'm doing to make this V6 to V8 swap work and retain all the factory function is a little more in-depth than I had originally thought it was going to be. And I want to be able to explain all of it to you guys clearly. So I'm going to break it up into a couple different videos. This is going to be obviously part one, and there's probably going to be one or two more additional parts onto this. It's going to be the only way that I can keep the videos at a length I like and explain with enough detail that I feel like you'll be able to understand. So until the next video, thanks so much for watching. I hope you're finding this educational and entertaining, and hopefully it helps you with your swap, whether you're doing a V6 to V8 Camaro swap like I am, or just putting an LS into some other vehicle. If you could take your time and read wiring diagrams and pinout lists, you can figure this stuff out. And I hope you'll at least give it a shot. Thanks again for watching, and until the next video, take care.